Hello again, everybody. Are we ready for our first actual video? This one's kind of a long problem. It was asked for me to work out by an old friend. So I've already got everything worked out, so you won't see me actually working anything out. I'm just going to go through the steps and explain, and I'll use my little laser pointer here. And we can get started. This is the long problem that we have to work out. Instructions are to simplify. To simplify anything like this, we have to factor first. To do that, we're going to work with each part individually. If we can get to the second page here. There we go. Alright, here is the top part of the first fraction. We're going to have the 2y squared minus 7y plus 3. Factoring can be difficult and it can be easy. The simplest way I've found is we're going to look at the first term. The only way we can come up with 2y squared is 2y and y. So I write them down right here underneath each other. Then we're going to look at this last term. The only way we can come up with 3 is 3 times 1. We're going to write them down. To check this to see if it works, we're going to cross multiply across. We're going to do 2y times 1 gives me 2y. We're going to do y times 3, which gives me 3y. There is no combination of 3y and 2y that equals this 7y up here. So this one, that's why it's marked out with an X, does not work. So we're going to try this again. We're going to do the 2y and the y, but this time we're going to move the 1 and 3. We're going to swap them around. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to check it by cross multiplying. We're going to get 6y, and we're going to get a y. We don't fill in any signs in the middle yet. That right there is done afterwards. Now there is a combination of 6y and y that equals 7y. Since we need this to be a negative 7y, that means that both the 6y and the y have to be negative. So the only way to come up with that is if you take 2y times a negative 3 and y times a negative 1. That's the reason why both signs right here are negative. Then when we write this in the factored form, we write it as you read it across, not as we cross multiply. That's just a check. So when we write it, it's 2y minus 1 in one parenthesis and y minus 3 in the other parentheses. Now we always go back and FOIL to check. So we're going to do our FOIL method, and it's first times first, which gives me 2y squared. Outside times outside, which would give me negative 6y. And then right here, inside times inside gives me negative 1y. And then last times last gives me positive 3. Now, that gives me positive 2y squared minus 6y minus 1y plus 3. Negative 6y and the negative 1y come together to make negative 7y, which brings us back to what our original was. So this factorization does work. This is the first part of it. Now we're going to move on and factor out each and every part of this. Here's the bottom part of the first fraction. We have 2y squared plus 3y minus 2. Same thing. The only way to come up with 2y squared is 2y times y. We come up with 2 by 2 and 1. We're going to cross multiply, which gives me 2y and 2y. There's no combination of 2y and 2y that would give me positive 3y. So that one doesn't work. Do it again. 2y and y. This time we're going to move the 2 and the 1 around. Cross multiply and see what we get. We get 4y and we get a y. Now, we need this to be a positive 3y. We know that the only way to come up with 3 with that is if they're subtracted. Since we want the 3 to be positive, we want our larger number to be positive, which means your 4 has to be positive here, and your y has to be negative. To get that, that means that when we cross multiply here to get our 4, this has to be a positive, and this has to be a negative. I'm not going to show the check on this, but it has all been checked, and this does work out. We write it as we read it, and it gives you 2y minus 1 and y plus 2. Now on to the top part of the second equation. Alright, we have 6y squared minus 5y plus 1. We're going to do the same process we've been doing. How do we come up with 6y squared? Well, we can use the combination of 2 times 3, and of course y and y, to come up with our y squared. There's only one way to come up with 1, and that's 1 and 1. We cross multiply, you get a 3y and a 2y. To get a negative 5 out of those, since these can have a combination to come up with 5, we're going to have a negative and a negative, because 2 negatives added together gives you still a negative. So both of these have to be negative. To come up with that, we have to have a negative here and here. Now, we could also use like the 6y and the 1y, but as you can see, as I checked it all here, this one doesn't work. And why does this one not work? We can come up with a 5, but the only way to come up with that is with a positive and a negative. A negative 1 times a positive 1, as you see right here, gives you a negative 1, and we're looking for positive 1. So this one will not work. Our final right here, as we read it across, is 2y minus 1 and 3y minus 1. Okay, on to the bottom part. We're going to do the same thing. The only way to come up with 3y squared, and as I did not write here, let me write that back in. Okay, go back to my pointer here. 3y squared plus 5y. Hold on, let's see. There we go. 3y squared plus 5y minus 2. Alright, the way to come up with 3y squared is 3y and y. And to come up with the 2, there's 2 and 1. And I put it in here as 1 and 2 in that order. If we cross multiply, you get a 6y. Cross multiply, we get a y. To get what we need, which is the positive 5, the only way we can come up with that is if the 6 is positive, because we got to have the larger number positive. We got the 6 by multiplying these two, which means the positive has to go here, and the negative has to go here. Then we write it out as we read it. 3y minus 1, y plus 2. Alright, that's all 4 parts factored. We're going to move on to the next step, which is go back to your original problem, and we're going to, what we do, a CF is called a change flip. When you multiply with fractions, when you divide with fractions, you have to change the sign and flip. So it's no longer going to be, there we go, it's no longer going to be dividing, it's going to be multiplying, and then we're going to flip the second fraction, as I've done here, as you can see. Now we're going to go back, as I've written here, and fill in the factored forms. We're going to do that on the next page. Okay, once we fill in the factored forms, as you can see, I've already done all the work. Everything is filled in, and what you'll see here is that the negative 2y, the 2y minus 1 and the 2y minus 1 both cancel out. Right here, the y plus 2 and the y plus 2 cancel out, and the 3y minus 1 and 3y minus 1 cancel out. All that you're left with now is y minus 3 and 2y minus 1. Once those are multiplied out, you end up with y minus 3 over 2y minus 1. This is your final answer. This is in the simplest form possible. There's nothing else you can do to it because nothing else will factor out. This was a long problem. We'll see how everybody likes this video. If we need to go into more detail, just everybody comment on it and let me know something.